Val Bercovici, what the multicloud? What's going on out there in the industry? 2018, certainly the year of the multicloud. First, you and I, we'll get into it. We have this podcast and with IBM, get a little inclination of what's going on, then the big news of the RedHat acquisition, and then take it to Amazon. Certainly can't wait to get into it today. Hey Val, it's so great to have you on TalkWithTman again. Certainly been an interesting year. We've seen some exciting things. We started back with the announcement of IBM, having some better alignment back in May with RedHat. We did a podcast with Ian Lynch and Steve Choquette, and certainly, been bugging them to see what's going on now with the big acquisition news. You take that, and then you certainly look to, what's happening with Amazon as well. I'd like to get your perspective on it. I know that you sat and, you were on the board with Kubernetes early days, and, certainly a lot of things going on in that space, and I'd love to get your insight.
Thanks, Tony. It's really good to be chatting again. It's been a little too long. Thinking back to May, actually, as you and I know all too well, it took us 6 tries to get that particular podcast.
Yeah, it
finally
was,
recorded amongst the 4 different locations. But maybe that was the universe trying to tell us something. That this was big.
It's big news. Yeah, look at it now, right? We certainly see that now. Certainly worth putting that 6 swings into that one.
Exactly, and it was worth it. As we've been saying for a while now, the reality of cloud penetrating more and more business computing worldwide means that it can't just be a monolithic thing. It can't just be a public cloud instance. There's a lot going on there. Companies don't like to be locked into one vendor. Overseas and even in Canada, you've got data privacy and data domesticity regulations that don't let data just fly around anywhere willy-nilly. And all of that realization in terms of what business is really all about on a global basis is being baked into the cloud industry right now.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, what Kubernetes. You being on a board member with Kubernetes and containers, I'm sure a lot of people still hear these things and they're like, I think I saw the one comic strip there, I'll take it in mauve or, something like that. So, how does it kind of work in layman's terms? What's the big advantages of containers and Kubernetes?
Well, let me give you a bit of a backstory. That certainly explains how I got into it, but I think it explains why it's become so popular and why it's got a bright future ahead of it. When I was at NetApp, I was first cloud CTO and then NetApp SolidFire CTO. There were a lot of storage and data realities we dealt with that a lot of early cloud innovators didn't have to deal with, and that was state and persistence of data and data gravity in particular, Dave McCrory's thing. And that made us realize that over the long term, maybe not the short term as the early adopters proved cloud was viable, but over the long term, you definitely had to account for the fact that you couldn't just move data as easily as you could move workloads, that data couldn't just be locked into one particular location and had to live in multiple locations, again, for regulatory and performance and availability reasons. So a multi-cloud strategy, you saw a lot of vendors, it was perceived as defensive, but a lot of data center vendors, including NetApp, had a multi-cloud strategy from the get-go, and I was a big part of that at NetApp. Fast forward, you saw the OpenStack movement come around, and more cloud-native solutions, particularly in storage, such as SolidFire, rise to the fore. I think OpenStack was a really good first attempt at being able to get, a common framework to multi-cloud, including hybrid cloud computing. Ultimately, it kind of descended into various people's distros, and you saw Gen 1 of Red Hat OpenShift was very much another of several distros. If you think about Mirantis and Piston and MetaCloud and so forth, you saw a lot of more or less proprietary, OpenStack silos as the industry moved on, and where the money was flowing. If you look at the Red Monk, book of developers of the new kingmakers, where the money was flowing, you weren't really seeing their needs being met just yet. OpenStack was a huge step in the right direction. But the granularity of virtual machines wasn't what people wanted. I always joke that perfect emulation of serial and parallel ports in this day isn't much value. So when Docker came around and really simplified the process of taking code you developed on your laptop, which is where all code starts, and being able to just move it quickly to a cloud instance, whether it's on-prem or on one or more public clouds, that was revolutionary. And as obviously we reached a plethora, basically a glut of container type solutions, management and orchestration had to come to the fore, and that's where history shows that Google's container orchestration system Borg was the right solution at the right time, and the open source implementation of that was a very early project called Kubernetes, which Google heavily sponsored. Thus was born the CNCF. And my development background, my spidey sense, from a developer sense, really kicked in because I realized more so than proprietary on-prem solutions, more so than OpenStack, containers and multi-cloud containers were the right abstraction level for mainstream cloud computing to really take off. And again, it was an instinct. There was no early data back then, but I think the data has certainly proven in hindsight now that that is what the industry has preferred.
Absolutely. I see that huge. And I've even been watching along the year, and, when the announcement came out from IBM, certainly was clear what was going on. First, you saw the big announcement with the multi-cloud manager, and you saw some, better macro controls over how you, manage those containers and those environments, certainly giving some advantage. And then recently there's been the DevOps control, same kind of thing. And I think that's a clear indication of how you see those two merging parties working together. And certainly, going to look forward to in 2019 to get on another podcast, you and I, with IBM, to source that out a little further. But you also were, with Amazon and re:Invent, and seen some different things happening from the Amazon Kubernetes, world as well, further kind of being the second big player to come into that multi-cloud, domain in 2018, where we are seeing some traction. Maybe you can give a little insight, for us on that perspective.
Yeah, I would say that, there were some really important bookends at the most recent AWS re:Invent conference, a few weeks ago in last November. And that was specifically the fact that with the Outpost announcement and a second-generation evolution of a very feature-rich VMware on AWS integration, you kind of saw Amazon, cement the trend of multi-cloud and by extension hybrid cloud being a real thing. You obviously had Microsoft with Azure really ahead of the market, ahead of their time years ago. And then I think this year, Google really started things off with Kubernetes on-prem, GKE on-prem. That was a very unexpected announcement, but also very much cemented multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. And then Amazon at the end of the year really put a bow on it and say, yes, multi-cloud and hybrid cloud is real. What also strikes me, being focused on buzzwords in the industry and very much blockchain lately, is that even though blockchain and cloud came out roughly at the same time, it's taken a lot longer for blockchain to become mainstream. And whereas Amazon kind of cemented, the end of the beginning with their Outpost offering and with the reality that multi-cloud and hybrid cloud is a mainstream thing right now, with their belated blockchain announcements, they basically announced, another beginning bookend saying now the beginning of the enterprise blockchain journey is really among us. And ironically, it wasn't even with their traditional managed blockchain announcements. It was with something called Quantum Ledger Database, QLDB, which is a simplified version of blockchain that's good enough for many, many enterprise requirements. So those are two things I'll be watching very closely in 2019, is how we enter the middle innings of cloud now. Everyone wants to say cloud is still young. I'm sorry, that phase is over. Cloud is entering a maturity phase right now. There's nothing young about it anymore. Yeah. But blockchain is very much still a young thing, particularly real-world, practical, non-speculative, non-hype cryptocurrency uses, but actual enterprise blockchain uses. And that is just beginning to enter the enterprise mainstream, and I'm really looking forward to what 2019 brings us there.
For sure. And I see that too, and I'd be curious. I know we've had some discussions around IoT and Edge, and, I've seen that playing in a lot with blockchain, and, I think I agree with Matt, Jack Ma on that, on how blockchain really initially as a cryptocurrency kind of rolled out, but you see the bigger value from the actual, connected nodes and the capabilities and the communities, all those other great things that you're starting to see evolve, right? And I'm certainly seeing from this cloud control some capability to connect back and forth into that. And take, for example, your organization Pencil Data and, what you're doing with Chainlink, right? I think you're seeing, a lot in your example right there of how you're putting control and regulatory capabilities around that, cloud capability with a cloud blockchain. So love to get your insight further on that.
Yeah, so if anything, I like to look at 2016 and some of the, Brexit results and some of the unexpected U.S. election results were an eye-opener. And as people started to sort of unpack what happened, what the F just happened basically in 2017, I say we kind of lost our innocence, where we realized social media, for all the good it's done in connecting us, has a very dark downside.
It was this. It was the collective facepalm, yeah.
And even some of the voice technologies that are becoming mainstream in everyone's homes have a downside, because it means it's always listening and always recording everything we do, right? Including our phones with Siri and things like that. So 2018 is sort of the beginning of, the reawakening of what's going on. If anything, it might even be known as the year of tech reckoning, with all of the scandals that have come out, whether they've been Facebook related or Google related or Marriott and Starwood or on and on and on. And 2019 is probably going to be a little bit of a shocker as well. There's a lot of transparency coming to, let's just call them questionable web metrics around mobile advertising and web-based advertising, and how those numbers are proving to be hyperinflated. So 2019,
I've read some of that, yeah.
2019 is going to be a year when all this really comes to a head, and the ultimate conclusion is there's just going to be a lot more regulation, a lot more international regulation, even more regulation on the EU side, who have been leading that charge, and probably ahead of my own expectations now, particularly with Democrats in the House. A lot more regulation proposed, at least in the United States, than we've ever seen before, and some of it may get bipartisan backing. So if anything, I think 2019 will be a year of major industry regulation and monitoring and oversight of our digital native world and digitally native economy right now is a big, big thing. And trusting the data, trusting all that monitoring information stream is really what Pencil Data is all about. And so we're going to have the challenge we had throughout our first year in 2018, which is, as a platform, we can do almost anything. What should we focus on? From a Darwinistic perspective, we focus or die as a young company. And will it be the regulatory angle? Will it be the insurance angle? Will it be some of the HR or other horizontal angles? Those are the fun things we're sorting through right now, with, again, just no shortage of use cases.
Yeah, and going back to your statement on cloud, and it's kind of it's not this big future growth of cloud, and sure there'll still be adoption and continued growth, and I think it will become much more of a as a service, and you'll see VMs being able to be controlled much better globally or macro level with Kubernetes, right? So all these different things happening, and what's happening from that perspective. Do you really see Kubernetes as a control to have some macro level controls? Like, I've seen some good press on how you can have tools in order to manage a number of different instances, from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, different things like that. Like, is this going to be a time where, if you really address this in the right way, you're going to have a better ability to have mass better control over things, or is it just going to become a bigger headache? Love to get your view on that.
You just said the key words there, governance and security. And so very much Kubernetes was initially, and CNCF was initially a Kubernetes, foundation. And it was very much around being able to just conceptually orchestrate a whole bunch of containers that sometimes have a half-life of a few seconds or so, as you have container bloat and as you're able to, add more and more cloud-native modules and computing to your app stack. But what you see, I think, the CNCF as a whole, and the growth of diversity of projects, service meshes and logging tools and monitoring tools and security tools and least privileged access tools and so forth, CNCF now is a fantastic barometer for the future of cloud-native computing, because it's so much more than Kubernetes right now. in addition to Kubernetes itself showing, with 1.1 or 1.2.x, showing some real signs of maturity. And when it comes back down to, I always joke, these businesses get real when the green visor people show up. So as you said, it's really very much now around not just being able to deploy all these containers or VMs or the combination thereof at scale. It's about how do you govern it? What happens when things go outside of policy, when things unintentionally violate regulations of the law? What happens when state now, you've got not just, mafia actors, but state, sponsored bad actors continuously, sometimes leveraging their own cloud native technologies, attacking you, probing around for any kind of weakness at the edge, at the core, at the link in between. Security and monitoring is very much a top priority. The headlines alone, I think, tell us that has to happen.
Wow, yeah.
And one of the things that really bears watching is one of the Democratic senators late last year actually proposed a bill saying that fines, multi-billion-dollar fines, are clearly not enough when some of the coffers of these companies have hundreds of billions of dollars, in them. And so jail time for the executives is going to enter the conversation in 2019. Overseas, it may actually become law. And you never know what might happen. Politics has never been crazier in the U.S., so you never know what might happen in the U.S. as well with regards to serious ramifications for not having green visor people, at your side as you deploy more multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, services and apps.
No, and it's not your daddy's internet. It's evolved so much since it started, but I think most of the rules and regulations are still pinholed on those initial days. So there's certainly clearly some regulation that has to come into play, especially when you further enable the edge. So it's certainly going to be interesting coming into 2019. So, last kind of view on maybe a couple points on 18 where you've seen some really, significant things, and kind of coming into 19 where, where you're betting. You've said a few things, but, maybe take that thought a little further.
So on the cloud side, I actually don't think we're giving Red Hat enough credit. And this is probably not a 2018 decision. It's probably a 2016 decision. But the fact that they were able to pivot really from OpenShift being just PaaS to OpenShift being OpenStack native, and then pivot again to OpenShift being container and Kubernetes native, we don't give enough credit for making that pivot, executing on that strategic decision, and offering real-world credible solutions for these, at the time, very young and immature technologies. And so I think, a lot of credit has to be given to Red Hat for just making good calls, and then the hard part, executing on those good calls, and putting themselves in a position to essentially, with IBM now, define what mainstream enterprise computing looks like from multi-cloud and a hybrid cloud perspective. So I think that's a really cool thing. As I mentioned earlier on, 2018 will go down in history as the end of the beginning. We're no longer in the wide-eyed, anything's possible, cloud days. That we're encountering really hard problems, whether it's old data center laws that haven't been adapted to cloud computing, or paper-based laws on the edge, basically, that have to be completely modernized for digital native services. So those are the kind of things I'm looking out for 2019 is, the middle innings of the cloud industry. And whether it's tools like blockchain, whether it's new tools around the corner, new forms of cryptography, I'm not a big believer in quantum computing entering the mainstream anytime soon. But as new technologies come around, it's a question of, what is maturing and going to be with us for a long, long time, what falls by the wayside, and, what comes back on, what appears on the windshield for the first time. So those will be things I look out for.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to be able to do our jobs for us so we can stay at home anytime soon, right? But, we can only hope. But, there's certainly some big traction happening there. I was just kind of thinking to myself and kind of chuckling in my head. I'm like, maybe should we have had a red hat and a blue hat? Like, next time, do we need to do one where and then we have to switch? Like, how do we work
It's all purple in 2019, obviously.
Yeah, then we'll have to all throw off the hats and put on the purple one, right? Like, certainly curious to see what happens there. Well, hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time again. It's really great to catch up. It's certainly been a while. I can't wait to get to meet you face to face. And hey, it's it's NFL season. Go Bears.
Go Bears. Yeah, good luck to everyone.
Right on. All right. Well, all the best.
Take care, Tony.
Bye now. Awesome.